Awesome. I can start recording. Awesome. Okay. Welcome to my problems with weighing and how to get better at it, plus some really crappy memes that I made last minute last week. So, this lecture is going to go over, I think, all the problems that I see in PF with weighing, what my takes are on it, which I do want to give a heads up are my takes. So not all debaters will probably agree with me, but I think regardless of if you agree with my takes or not, there's some stuff to learn about weighing in general. So if you take away anything from this lecture, it's two things. It's A, that all weighing needs warranting, and B, that it needs to be comparative. So we outweigh on scope is not weighing, or we outweigh on prerequisite is not weighing. You need to give a reason why. You can't just assert these things. Some people will say, I quote, we outweigh on scope because our scope is bigger. That's not warranted. What does that mean? A lot of debaters will use these buzzwords and replace warranting and actual logic with it. So weighing needs to have warranting and it needs to be comparative. So even saying we outweigh on scope because we affect 5 million people is still not weighing because you're not doing any comparison. All you're doing is reiterating your argument. What weighing is it's essentially the comparison between two arguments, and then you're concluding why one is comparatively better. So if you're just stating why your argument is good, all you're doing is reiterating case. What weighing needs to do is you need to compare it directly to their argument, i.e. we outweigh on scope, we're affecting 5 million people, while at best they're only affecting 20,000. Even so, that weighing is a little lackluster, but I think scope weighing as a whole is pretty lackluster because there's not much additional warranting you can give. But as it says here, there always needs to be a clear connection between the arguments you are weighing, and you need to do the analysis specifically between those and what your arguments are, your opponents are reading. And that's what being comparative is. So here's my rant on probability weighing. I don't think it exists. If you read my paradigm on Tabroom, I have a whole little section about how I think probability weighing doesn't exist. Because in technical PF rounds, if you're winning your link on the flow, it becomes 100% probable. If you read an argument and your opponents concede it, that argument is fundamentally believed to be true. So regardless of how probable it might actually be in a real world scenario, in round, when something is conceded, or if you're winning your link pretty cleanly, it should be 100% probable. The same thing is like if a piece of defense is conceded, then that defense is probably 100% probable. So that begs the issue, how do you measure how probable something actually is? Because probability is a real concept. It exists in real life. So if it exists in real life, how do we make it clear in a debate round? Because you have to measure this probability while also taking into account that when things are conceded, or if you're winning it, that automatically becomes probable. 90% of people reading probability weighing lack a warrant, don't make it comparative, and read it as a 5-second blip. And the reason why that tends to happen is just because probability weighing doesn't exist. I hear too many people saying we outweigh on probability because our argument is more probable. Stuff like that, it lacks a warrant. It's not comparative. And that's just because I don't think it exists in the way that we traditionally view probability weighing. However, I think there are two exceptions, and we're going to go into those exceptions and how to actually make those exceptions substantial in a round. Hold on, I'm getting water. Here are the exceptions, I think, to probability weighing. I think A is historical precedent. If you have some sort of historical example of your argument happening, you probably have a bit more credibility because that proves that in the past, your argument has been able to happen and thus can happen again. If your argument has never happened, then the likelihood of it going to happen is probably less because you've not shown that there's A, the capacity for your argument to happen, and B, the intent for your argument to happen. And all arguments need both capacity and intent. Sorry, I got something in the chat. I can answer that later. Okay. Even if, so when you add a historical precedent, you can give some sort of probability analysis that the fact that your argument has happened in the past in different situations means that it can probably happen again. But let's say you have a situation where both sides have some sort of historical precedent, which is probably what's going to happen on like the HSR topic, is that like both sides are going to have like, one side's going to probably have like HSR was successful in China and the other side's going to have like HSR was not successful in like California, for example. So even if you have historical precedent, even if both sides have it, you can still do weighing on whose historical precedent is better, and that in and of itself is probability weighing. There you can make the analysis of whose historical precedent is more comparable to what you're analyzing in this round. And whoever can win that debate can probably win the probability debate. So what I mean by that is if your historical precedent is like from China and we're arguing about the US, you can do analysis as to why China is comparable to the US, maybe in a population like analysis or in an economic growth analysis. But on the other side, if someone else is reading historical precedent weighing and it's between China and the US, you can give warrants as to why that's not comparable. That even if they have historical precedent, why you shouldn't be comparing successes in China to potential successes in the United States, because there are so many different factors. And I think that's happening a lot on this topic and something that like debaters have to do better. So you can use historical precedent and you can argue why your historical precedent is better given those types of factors. The second type of probability weighing that I think exists is actor analysis. Every argument has an actor, and I think debaters forget this too often. So take a second when you're arguing your case to think, who is your actor? Is it the United States? Is it Kim Jong-un? Is it terrorists? Is it workers? Is it landlords? Is it investors? Every argument has an actor throughout the argument because arguments are about life, and in life, things happen because of people. So depending on who your actor is, you should look at their motivations, their goals, their interests. Take a second out of debate and think about it on a psychological and like sociological level. Who are your actors? What are their motivations? What do they want? And how can you use that to do better comparison? So once you've done that, you can make really good analysis about how probable something is to happen. For example, if you're, and we'll get into the same exact example later, but if one side is arguing like that the US or like that Iran will set off like a nuclear weapon, and the other side is arguing that you're going to have like nuclear terrorism, you can do actor analysis weighing on the link level. You can say that nuclear terrorism outweighs on probability since terrorists are more likely to set off a nuclear weapon because they don't care about repercussions like mutually assured destruction or consequences after, as long as they've like been able to go through with their cause. But states, on the other hand, have a responsibility to keep their citizens safe, so are scared of the repercussions. Doing things like that will really, really, really set you ahead. Something that happened the other day that in my lab that I think was like a really good example of this actor analysis weighing is looking at like choices of people. For example, like, does the actor of your case argument have a choice in what they can do? Is their only choice logically to do your argument? And does your opponent's actor have multiple choices? You can do analysis that yours is more probable because your actor only has one logical choice in the situation, and it's to have your argument happen, while the actors in their argument can do a bunch of different things. I think on that same level, looking at motivations and like what these actors want. For example, investors always want to increase their profits. And so taking that and making analysis on investors always want to increase their profits, but like comparatively, these other actors don't care as much. You can do analysis there. So I hope this makes sense that you should take a step back from looking at probability as like, you know, thinking, oh, this just seems outlandish, to really digging deep into the warranting of these arguments and thinking, why is something more probable? Who is doing the action? Who is doing the argument? And how does analyzing that make your argument more probable? Does anyone have any questions about that? I think a really good example of this is anytime there's a North Korea topic, people will do like Kim Jong-un is an irrational actor. And like, as soon as something to do with like South Korea gaining power comes into play, he always makes like really irrational decisions. I think doing stuff like that is almost a mix between these both, because you're saying that like as an actor, Kim Jong-un doesn't really care about repercussions as long as he can like work his way up to reclaiming territory in South Korea. And historically, every time that like South Korea has like either gotten a new ally or like grown in power, Kim Jong-un has made really rash decisions. So that's almost combining both of these into some sort of grouped probability weighing on Kim Jong-un and what he's more likely to do. And obviously, when you're doing that weighing, you need to make it comparative. Like I said earlier, you need to look at your like opponents' actors, and you need to do like reverse probability. You have to think about like why A, they don't have that motivation, and B, they don't have that historical precedent. But I think looking at your actors as people is something that's really smart to do. I got a question that why isn't solvency legit probability weighing? I think what the person asking this question means is like doing weighing as in like there are multiple other countries doing this exact same thing. Like for example, if you read weighing that's like they don't win, or like we outweigh on solvency because we're the only like, or our argument is the only thing contributing to this problem, while they have many different things contributing to this problem. That's not probability weighing because that's just a non-unique, right? You're saying that even when their argument happens, they're not solving for their impact because so many other actors or so many other countries are doing the same thing. I think that's just a non-unique. That's inherently what a non-unique is. So any other questions before I move on? Does everyone get like the importance of looking at like who the actors in your arguments are? Feel free to ask questions. Like I know this is a lot. Okay, cool. What the fuck is time frame? I think ways people do time frame and round is underwarranted and underdeveloped. And so we're going to talk about how to make that better. So here's some ways that people do time frame weighing. Sometimes I'll hear we outweigh on time frame because our impacts happen sooner. Okay, cool. Yours, it happens sooner. Why do I care? What does that mean? On the other hand, you'll see we outweigh on time frame because our impacts are long-term and theirs are not. Again, what does this mean? Time frame is used as a buzzword in PF and is really rarely elaborated on. And most of the time, people will just think like, oh, because my impacts are long-term, they're better. But nobody actually digests what that means and why that means it's better or worse. So let's look at actual time frame weighing. I think this happens on two levels. First is urgency. So you can argue that since our impacts happen first, you prefer them. And that can happen in two different ways. First is intervening actors. I was going to write an example of what this means, but I'm just going to explain it. I think this is honestly the best type of weighing. I think it's really good weighing, and I think it's weighing that not enough debaters do. So if you take away anything from this lecture, it's that you should probably be doing intervening actors weighing. It's that if your impacts happen sooner, that means that there's less of a chance for something that's not the resolution to cause or affect your impacts. i.e., when HSR, if we increase investment into HSR, and your argument is that like that investment, I don't know, like crashes the airline industry stock market because of perceptions, that happens immediately once the investment is shifted. So what you could argue is that since your impacts happen sooner, there's less of a chance for intervening actors to get involved and stop your impact from happening. On the other hand, let's say your impact is like climate change that happens in like 2032, right? If your terminal impact, or even your impact in general, like let's say it relies on the fact that HSR is built in 20 years. If your impact happens far, far away and doesn't happen first, there's two things that can happen. One is that an intervening actor can cause your impact to happen in a different way. So another thing can cause the same type of pollution that you're saying HSR might produce. Or B, an intervening actor can prevent your impact from happening, right? Let's say in that time, Biden somehow becomes like magical and convinces all the Republicans to pass like some amazing climate bill that like makes the US carbon net zero, right? Two things can happen when your impacts happen farther away from the resolution. A, something else can solve for it. B, something else can cause it. So when you think about it, this time frame weighing is just probability. And when I say probability, I mean real probability, because what you're saying is that in that time, when you have more time in between, your impacts or your opponent's impacts are less probable because more intervening actors can take a role. So in this sense, I think that this urgency weighing is a mix between time frame and probability. This is again why I hate PF, because I hate these buzzwords. I don't think time frame should be a word. I don't think probability should be a word. This should just be analysis that is weighing, right? Because it's hard to really differentiate whether this intervening actors analysis is probability or time frame. I think just look at it as what it is, which is analysis on if your impacts will happen and what actors might intervene throughout it. I got a question. How specific should you be with intervening actors? I think you can do two things. One is way better than the other. A, you can say, we outweigh because our impacts happen sooner, which means that because their impacts happen in a longer span of time, you can have intervening actors which either A, cause their impact to happen, or B, prevent their impact from happening. So you always prefer ours because you know it's going to happen, and not have any actors as soon as the resolution is passed. That's a way you can do this weighing. The stronger way you do this weighing is when you're actually making it even more warranted. You can say, prefer our impact because it happens immediately. You're not going to have these intervening actors on their side. And then you can give examples of what those intervening actors might be. I think that's stronger, but obviously you need to have a little bit of preparation in order to do that, or you need to have like a lot of good background knowledge. So there are two ways you can do this weighing. One is you can just state that because yours happens sooner, for the warrant of intervening actors, you should prefer yours. Or you can say, our impacts happen sooner, so prefer ours because their impacts have X, Y, and Z that can happen. You can actually give a thought out warrant of what X, Y, and Z is and how that would be a probable intervening actor. So I think that's the better type of weighing, or the better way to do it. But if you don't have that, you can still do classic, like, what if something were to happen in that time that they have. I just don't think that's as strong. Second thing is short circuit analysis. If your impacts happen first, then your impacts have the ability to prevent their impacts from happening, right? So this is basically just short circuit weighing, but I put it under here because I think short circuit weighing is just time frame. Again, I hate buzzwords. This gets really confusing. But if your impacts happen sooner than your opponent's impacts, then your impacts materialize and have the ability to prevent your opponent's impacts from happening. So it solves everything. Yay, hip, 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 hooray, yippee, right? Like if you're saying your impacts happen first and you make the analysis that if your impacts happen first, then their impacts won't happen, then you've just done short circuit weighing, but you're also doing like this time frame, our impacts happen first analysis, which I think makes it stronger. Okay, let's talk about long-term weighing. Every single piece of time frame weighing I have heard in the last year from opponents from practice rounds I've judged is we outweigh on time frame because our impacts are long-term. Now, most of the time, that's all the analysis goes to. Like, there's nothing more. And that's because I think this is just a scope magnifier, right? Think about this. If your impacts happen for a longer period of time, that's more years that your impacts are going to be affecting people. So that's more people that are being affected. In that sense, a long-term impact is just you saying that you outweigh on scope because you're affecting more people for longer periods of time. So I think that, again, time frame weighing is this like subsection of weighing that PFers created that is just other types of weighing, right? So in essence, when you're giving this long-term analysis, or if your go-to in round is to say we outweigh because like our impacts happen over a longer period of time, the analysis that you should be doing is prefer our impacts because they happen over a longer period of time and thus affect more people, right? You should be adding that analysis that the reason why that weighing is important is because it affects more people, right? Because at the end of the day, just saying it happens over a longer period of time doesn't show me why I should be preferring your argument. And I think this can happen regardless of if your impact is scalar or even a brink, right? Because if your impact is scalar and it's like every 1% increase in GDP lifts like 1 million people out of poverty, like I'm just throwing that out there. If your impact happens longer, that's probably more 1% that are increasing. But I think it's the same with a brink, right? Like if your impact is like it causes a recession and that recession lasts for more years, then that's, even though it's a brink related impact, it's still affecting people for a longer period of time. Does anyone have any questions about that? Okay, cool. Let's talk about Lincolns. Lincolns, they're not weighing. Why do we call them weighing? They're not. And so here's a fun drawing that I made in order to explain that. Sorry, my mom's just like, oh, she's leaving. Okay, bye. Okay, let's look at my fun little drawing I made. Let's say you are neg. You have a case. Your case has a link and it has an impact. Imagine I drew the impact here as well, but the impact of the neg case doesn't matter in this situation. And the F has a, or let me actually annotate the screen so you can actually see what like I'm pointing to or whatever. Or is there the little, oh my gosh, do I have this? Oh my gosh, I do. So now you can see like my, you can see my little like red dot thingy. Okay. So you have your neg link and the AF case has an AF link and an AF impact. What a link-in essentially does is it takes your link from case and it connects it into your opponent's impact. So what does that mean? Can anyone tell me what it means when you have a link and you have an impact?
You now cause their impact?
Yeah, I mean, you now have a piece of offense. So what I mean by this is when you're doing a link-in, it's not weighing, it's not comparison. All you're doing is you're taking your link and mix matching it with their impact, which essentially just creates a piece of case offense, which is not weighing. So at best, when you read a link-in, you have another piece of independent offense for your side. Is that weighing? Is it comparative? No. All you're doing is instead of having this AF link into the AF impact, you're taking your case link and you're saying not only does it cause my case impact, but it also causes their impact, which is just another argument. Because you can, here's a piece of, here's a thought. Any link-in that you read could be read in case. Every single link-in that is made in any round could be an argument that you are just reading in case, because all you're doing is taking a link that happens from your side of the topic and giving it another impact. So let's talk about how to actually make link-ins into weighing. Every link-in needs to be weighed. I don't care what type of weighing you do, it needs to be comparative. It can literally just be a sentence that does additional analysis. Because let's go back to this past slide, right? If you have a piece of offense, the way that you make a piece of offense into comparative weighing is by adding weighing. So in order to make a link-in into actual weighing in a round, you need to do weighing that you would do on any other case argument. And I'll get into this. Let's look at some examples. This will definitely help you like visualize what I'm talking about more. I have like one from a specific topic and one just generally about 2 impacts. So let's look at the specific topic. I hope most of you probably debated the NATO topic, the Baltics one. So the biggest AF argument was that like, or no, wait, no, this was from the Turkey topic. Yeah, this was from Turkey. The biggest AF argument was about like a NATO collapse or preventing a NATO collapse. And then the biggest neg argument was about like escalating and like triggering Russia. Actually, I think this different like comparison happened on the Baltics topic too, but whatever. We have two arguments. One is that NATO collapses, and one is that the resolution creates escalation. So if you are the side that's arguing NATO collapse, the link in is if NATO were to be delegitimized and collective defense were to no longer exist, which happens if NATO were to collapse, Russia would feel emboldened and escalate because A, they aren't constricted by NATO's military abilities, because if NATO doesn't exist, then NATO has no deterrence. But B, Russia now has a power vacuum to fill, because if NATO no longer exists, then there is a power vacuum in Europe that Russia now wants to fill, so they escalate. So this up here, under the 1, is just the link in itself. It's saying that when NATO collapse happens, it causes the bad escalation, right? But at best, when you just read this first part, all you're doing is just saying, okay, you have a way that you're causing escalation, but I also have a way that we're causing escalation through my argument. How to make this comparative is you do weighing. You say, prefer this link, because instead of triggering a one-time escalatory incident, which the escalation argument is saying, now, if you have the dissolution of NATO, it causes permanent Russian enlargement, because Russia doesn't just escalate once as a retaliatory response. Now they are filling a power vacuum. Now they are always going to be aggressive. Now they are always going to be escalated, because not only are they not constricted by NATO, but they also are emboldened to fill a power vacuum. So if I use buzzwords to explain this, this is the Lincoln. And what you're doing is you're scope weighing or magnitude weighing that Lincoln. You're saying that my link into Russian escalation happens on a bigger scale, because it's not just a one-time escalatory incident, it is permanent Russian enlargement. So in a sense, what you're doing is you are creating magnitude weighing off of a Lincoln. And what that does is it makes it comparative. It gives you an advantage. It gives you a comparative weighing. Does that make sense? Does everyone have any questions out of that example? Now we're going to show you some actor analysis weighing on a Lincoln, right? So we're just kind of combining everything I talked about. Here, let me get a pen again. Okay. If you're arguing a refugee crisis as your impact, and the other side is arguing nuclear war as their impact, right? This is weighing that's saying that the refugee crisis is more important. So let's look at the weighing. The weighing says a refugee crisis links into nuclear war, as neglected refugees can become radicalized and form terrorist organizations, which can then get their hands on a nuclear weapon. I think this could have been better warranted, like they want to get their hands on a nuke, but regardless, I wrote this a while ago. It's not the best warranting, but the warranting still exists. Let's look at how I weighed this Lincoln. I said that nuclear terrorism is a more likely, so probability, link into nuclear war because, and for 3 reasons. I said A, terror groups don't have hotlines with other countries, meaning miscalculation is much likelier. B, terrorist groups have never handled these weapons before. They have no safety measures for an accidental launch. And C, mutually assured destruction applies to states, but terrorists see themselves as martyrs and thus are willing to irrationally die for their cause. I want to go into a little more depth about how to do the actor analysis weighing I did here, but I want to break it down even further, because I think if I went back and I were to edit these slides and give this lecture again, I would break it down a little further. So I want to talk about 2 things. I want to talk about capacity and intent, because actually I'm going to go back a little bit. When talking about actor analysis, I think you can analyze 2 things that will help you. 1 is capacity, and 2 is intent. Can anyone explain these 2 things?
Like capacity is just like the means that you have to be able to do something, and the intent is just like whether or not, why would someone do that, basically.
Perfect. Thank you, Tui. So when you're analyzing an actor, every single person has capacity and intent. Let's say my argument is that I'm going to go out and I'm going to just start egging some cars, right? I'm just going to go out into the street today and I'm just going to throw some eggs at some people's cars. Let's analyze this on probability, whether it is probable or not that I'm going to do this. A, do I have the capacity? Do I have eggs in my fridge? If I don't have eggs in my fridge, I don't have the capacity to do this argument. It's pretty improbable that I'm going to be able to go outside and egg some people's cars if I don't have eggs in my fridge, right? Do I have the capacity to go buy eggs outside? Do I have cash? Can I go buy these eggs? If I don't have the capacity to do my argument, to egg someone's car, to cause that impact, then it's probably very unlikely that that impact is ever going to happen. And this analysis is on me specifically, right? Like, Tui, you could have eggs in your fridge. Maybe it's more probable that you're going to go egg someone's car because you have eggs in your fridge. You have the capacity to do it. I don't have the capacity to do it because I don't have eggs in my fridge. Let's look at the intent, right? Here's another way you can analyze actors. I feel really malicious today. I want to egg some people's cars. I think it will be funny. I think it will be humorous. That's me, right? Maybe Tui, for example, doesn't have the intent, right? Tui feels really bad if he damages someone's car, right? He doesn't want to do that. So when we analyze these two things, when we analyze the capacity of an actor and we analyze the intent of an actor, you can get probability analysis on whether an actor will actually do something. Does that make sense? I hope the egg analogy helped. Let's go back to what I was talking about now that we have capacity and intent. And let's take these three warrants here on actor analysis. Someone tell me, we're going to label it C or I. Capacity for C, I for intent. For this first warrant, for A, is this capacity or intent that we're analyzing?
Capacity.
Capacity. Why is it capacity?
It's because terrorists don't have hotlines, so it doesn't really have to do with whether they want something. It's like what they don't have.
Exactly. Perfect. Thank you. For B, is this capacity or intent?
Capacity.
Why?
Because this is regarding their ability to do something. Like this is something about their experience and not if they want to do it.
It's their ability. And they have no safety measures and they don't have the experience. Something to remember that capacity is not just something physical. It's not just a physical thing like an egg. Capacity can also be, do you have the skills to do something, right? Like, let's say I am a baby. I probably don't have the capacity to throw an egg at a car if I'm a baby because I literally just don't have the skills to. I might be a baby who has so many eggs, but if I don't have the strength to throw those eggs at a car, it doesn't matter if I have the eggs physically, I still don't have the capacity. So capacity can also analyze things like skills. So yes, really good. And for this third one, for C, is this capacity or intent?
Intent,
Why?
because their intent is their cause, and this is describing how they do it.
Yeah. Their intent is that they don't care about mutually assured destruction, but states do. So they don't have the intent of causing a nuclear war. All right, I get some chat messages. Okay, cool. Y'all are just participating. Awesome. Amazing. So, where does this go? Does this make sense to everyone? That like the way you can do really good weighing is just to throw all these buzzwords that you've been taught out the window and really analyze the way that people act. I think that debate is more of a sociology related, like you do more sociology related argumentation than we think, right? Because every argument is about life and life has people with both capacity and intent. So when you're analyzing arguments, too many debaters just clutch onto these buzzwords instead of actually analyzing why things happen and the capacity and the intent for people and actors to do certain things. Cool. We're going to read one more example, and then if we have time, we'll do some brainstorming. So let's look at the IMF topic. I hope everyone here knows generally what the IMF is. I'll just give a brief recap. On the IMF topic, the AF argument was that the IMF can help countries prevent defaults. And the neg argument that was really common is that the IMF has conditional loans, which cause countries to implement austerity measures, which are really bad. So let's read this link in. So the link in is Mosey 16 explains that when a country defaults on debt, its credit score plummets and future loans will have much higher interest rates, meaning that the government will have to spend significantly more on repayments instead of social services, or won't be able to get funding for social services in the first place. What this means is that if the AF impact were to happen and countries were to default on their debt without the IMF, then their credit score would drop and they'd never be able to fund future social programs, because when you default on your debt, you become so untrustworthy to international investors that you need to raise your interest rates so high that you basically just run out of money. And what these governments have to do is they have to pay so much on interest rates that they can't pay for social services. So that's what the Lincoln is. Let's look at the two ways that I weighed this Lincoln. The first is on time frame. The austerity that the neg argues is only short term because it only exists for as long as the financial crisis happens, whereas a bad credit score, which happens from if a country defaults, lasts for decades and it impacts all future loans, causing them to implement austerity over and over again, because now if a country just needs more and more loans, then they're probably going to just need more and more loans from the IMF and need more and more austerity. So on net, a one-time austerity measure from a one-time help from the IMF is like, this technically is also scope. It's the type of time frame I was talking about before about long-term, right? It's just a scope magnifier. It's just saying that like one-time austerity is better than consistent austerity, which happens from this Lincoln. B is severity. It's even if you buy that the IMF does austerity, when austerity happens through the IMF, you have professionals, right, that have been working and perfecting how the IMF does austerity for decades. So the measures are implemented smoothly, right? You have people making sure that it doesn't go wrong. They're actually editable, right? So when the IMF says, like, here's the austerity measures we want you to take, host governments can like try to edit and revise it. However, when you have natural austerity, which happens when your credit score drops, it's abrupt. And countries can't control that to any extent. It's abrupt and it's out of their control. And it happens just because they can't afford social services. So it's saying that the austerity that might happen, even if you buy that the neg case occurs, is better than austerity that would happen if the Lincoln is true. Does that make sense? Does anyone want me to re-explain that? Or have any questions about those two pieces of weighing on the Lincoln? Feel free to ask me questions. Like, I know this is a lot of very technical, like I tried to give the heads up before, but let me know. Okay. So the last thing I had planned for this is let's brainstorm for some Lincolns on this topic, right? So give me two arguments. Give me an AF argument on HSR or give me a neg argument. You can just call it out.
Neg gentrification.
Neg gentrification, and then let's like have the impact be
As environment.
what link for environment? Just like no more emissions on the road, like car emissions.
Yeah, basically.
All right. If you are the neg, what's a Lincoln you could read to AF? Let's brainstorm. If people are displaced,
They
then
move like via cars and that causes emissions. They can't use the HSR. I don't know if that's good or not, but
If folks are displaced, then they have less money to like afford like more like pricey renewable sources of energy, like solar power and wind energy. So like they're less likely to use renewable sources of energy.
So like even if someone is displaced and they find a new home, right, it's probably so expensive for this whole process that like once they get their new home, they're not going to be like, let's implement some solar power, man. Like that's probably not going to happen. How can we weigh this Lincoln? Right? Because you have something, you need to argue why your link into air pollution is better than their link on car emissions?
Displaced people don't have the capacity to do anything else other than not use renewables. Whereas car emissions is a more general argument, and some of the people who are like within that argument might be able to use renewables anyways.
Let me think about that for a second. I think you're onto something. Wait, my brain's just acting a little bit slow.
You're good.
Yeah. I think you're right. You can say that like there's literally no capacity for those who are being displaced to like, oh, here's one. Here's actually really good thinking. So legit no capacity, which is the money for those to be displaced to use renewables. Or actually, let's phrase it as this. I think this is really good. You first say that wave of electric cars, or like there's a trend of electric cars, and in the next decade, most Americans will shift to electric or hybrid, right? Then you're gonna say that prefer our link because those who are displaced have legit no capacity to use renewables / electric cars, while everyone in there or everyone in the cars they talk about is able to afford to switch to electric cars. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So here you're analyzing the capacity of the actors, right? This is really good practice of what we were just doing. Is you're looking at the actors of who is in this argument, right? This AF argument is talking about people who own cars. The assumption is that these people can afford cars, afford gas, right? Because in order to have a lot of car emissions, you need to afford gas. General like middle class Americans. The people being affected by this argument are probably low income Americans whose like lifestyle is more volatile because they are like harmful, like harmfully affected, right? So I think a great thing that we just did is we took each argument that we were trying to weigh and we looked at who these people are and what their constraints on life are, right? Those being affected by displacement and gentrification have more constraints on what they can do, right? So because of that, it's probably easier to weigh that it's more important to help these people, right? Because they have more constraints on what they can do, right? But these people, everyone being affected by these car emissions are people who own cars. That means that they can afford cars. They can afford gas. And they're probably general middle class Americans. So from that, we were able to make a Lincoln, right? Which is not weighing on its own. If I just read that like displaced people are less likely to buy renewables because of the economic hardships of being displaced, right? That's just saying that if I win my argument, I'm also getting your impact. What we did here is we did analysis on why you should prefer one over the other. So I think that was really good work we just did. I got also DM'd something, so let's read this through. Oh, I got the opposite. So AF Lincoln to neg. So air pollution affects people who are displaced the hardest because they are in worse conditions, more susceptible to air pollution. I think something you can even go further with that is that like people who are displaced probably can't afford healthcare, right? And so for things like lung disease, which is like the most common impact of like how the internal link of how you die from air pollution is like lung disease. And so if people have insurance or are insured Americans, right, they're probably more able to afford like healthcare and like the proper like technology, like I don't know, maybe like a CPAP or something. Right. But if you're displaced and your income is only going to making sure that you have shelter and a home, right, and you probably can't afford that insurance, you probably put that on the back burner. So that's actually really good. Good job, Aaron. I think that's like a warrant you could add to make it even more warranted. And then what Aaron did is he outweighed on scope first by saying that the people affected by gentrification are only in a small area around HSR, but air pollution would affect every low-income American, regardless of if they're in a gentrified area. And then the second thing Aaron did was intervening actors, which is that there are, for displacement, there are intervening actors such as lawsuits and court clogs. And it takes a long time to start the process of displacement, which means that other things can intervene. But air pollution like makes people sick right away, like as soon as you have air pollution. So there's less intervening actors. So I think that was really good analysis that Aaron just did. So good job. I think you took away what I wanted to get out of from this lecture. So really good job. I think if everyone can start doing this, when you're thinking of weighing, is just taking apart the weighing and thinking about who the actors are, thinking about how you can take Lincoln's and how, back to this drawing, you need to do additional analysis in order to make it weighing. I think everyone here is going to become a better weigher. So that's my lecture, my problems with weighing and how to get better at it. But I want to take this time for some questions. I will link the slides. Yeah. Here are the slides, but feel free to ask me questions. And if you ever want to run weighing by me, you can always shoot me it on Slack and I can give some feedback. But I hope everyone got some new insight, because like, I know that when I started thinking this way, it gave me a whole new perspective on what weighing is and how to actually like take advantage of weighing and round. Oh, I got a question. How do you weigh an impact that doesn't trigger immediately, but will sometime in the future against an impact that does trigger immediately? Well, that's just like you would weigh any argument in a different way, right? Like they're probably going to do some sort of urgency weighing, but that doesn't mean you can't do a magnitude weighing. You can say that like your impact is bigger, so even if it happens further out, like it affects more people, that's more important. You can also do capacity and intent and probability, right? Like, and then what you do there is when you have two pieces of weighing, two things you do. A, you respond to the warrants just like you would any other argument. So you can defensively respond to weighing just like you would any other argument, because all weighing has a warrant. And if it doesn't have a warrant, then your response is their weighing doesn't have a warrant, right? So first thing you should do, try to respond to it on a logical, warranted level. Second thing you can do is meta weigh, right? Like, I think once you have the correct way to probability weigh, then you can do probability meta weighing that actually makes sense, right? So yeah, stuff like that. Any other questions? We have like 2 minutes left. Can you give me like a thumbs up if you like learned something like helpful that like changed your like how you thought about weighing? Okay, awesome. I'm glad a few of you were able to take some good stuff away from this. Awesome. That makes me really great to see. Hi, yeah. Aisha, hello. What's up? How do we make a block file? I think that is a question for your lab leaders, because I don't really have time to go into that right now.
Do you mind dropping the link for the slideshow in the chat?
Oh yeah, I thought I did that already.
Oh, did you? Oh yeah, I saw it. Never mind.
Tui, we can talk about that in lab. I think that's probably a better question for like Evan. All right, anything else? I'm gonna